What's up guys, welcome back to McLaren Media. You join me in front of my Ford Fiesta Mk6 Zetec S 1.6 TDCI, where I'm going to be walking you through how to change the clutch. So guys, it's going to be a little bit different from my usual videos where I'm filming what I'm doing, because the reason I'm going to be doing sort of photos and walking you through is for a couple of reasons. One, it's incredibly tight in there to get camera stuff. It's really tight, you can barely get your hands in somewhere. And really with this job, because it's sort of quite specialist, what I found was more beneficial, because it's something I could have done with about a week ago when I started this. It's just some information about where everything is, because being the Focus engine, and I think it's its own gearbox, I'm not sure about that, there's no one really working on them. The Haynes manual doesn't say a lot, the internet doesn't really say a lot, and a lot of the stuff was just sort of like which order you do it in and what needs to come off. So what I'm going to do is actually, I've taken loads of photos, I've been doing this, I'm just going to walk you through. There are some videos, and obviously I'm going to be using some footage from my older videos on how to do certain things that you need to take off to get to the gearbox. But yeah, for now we're just going to walk through. Hopefully you can take your notes from it, because honestly I could have really used a video like this before I started, so hopefully this is beneficial to you. So yeah, let's crack on with changing the clutch out. So guys, actually one of the first things you're going to want to do is actually park the car in a really suitable spot to work on. You need lots of space for this, all around the car, especially around the front. And you want to crack the drive shaft nuts open. So you need a breaker bar really for that. Both passenger and driver side need to come off. So crack those loose, and then you can jack the car up in the air, take the wheels off and put it on axle stands. I found putting the axle stands on the on the front subframe, sorry, like sort of push back a bit, is the best place to be, because you're going to be working all around under the engine, so you don't want anything in the way. And then really what you want to do first is try and get the drive shafts out, which on mine proved a bit difficult on the driver's side, but basically I'll show you. I've got a video that I'll leave a link to in the description of this video of how you take them out. Really it's just disattaching and disassembling all the front suspension gubbins, and then once you've taken those out, you can then start to work around the rest of the car. It's a good idea, once you've pulled the drive shafts out, just to bung the holes with either a piece of cloth or like a tissue like I've got. It just stops the oil gushing out. You are going to lose some oil, but it just stops it completely gushing out. You will also need to remove the front bumper and headlights to gain access to more of the bolts, but I have another video for this already on my channel, so I'll leave a link in the description for that. So going into the engine bay, you first need to take off the air intake pipe, which is one 7mm socket, or 1 7mm Jubilee, sorry, on my air intake, and just leave it to one side. You don't really need to unplug that at all. And then next you want to remove the battery, which I've already done a video on, but removing the battery on these is really easy. Just undo the nuts, undo the negative and then the positive terminals, and pull that out of the way. And then you want to remove the actual battery tray. If you look inside the battery tray, there's 3 bolts to hold it in. Simply pull them out, and then you'll be into the lower battery tray compartment, which is where things start to get a little bit rusty. So I'd recommend probably getting a bit of WD-40 and hitting some of the bolts as they're stuck in. Now you'll find this lower battery tray is held on with 1 bolt back there in that left corner, another one there, another one there, and then the ECU has 2 10mm bolts, 2 10mm nuts. This corner, I believe this is the headlight leveling thing. There's just another 10mm bolt there, and you can unclip this, and then that can be thrown out of the way over that side of the engine. There is this small 8mm bolt holding on 2 earthing straps. The one that you want to get off really is this top one, because it leads and sits on top of the gearbox. So if your type of Fiesta has power steering, This bracket here, which is held on by a 15mm bolt, is holding the power steering lines on. And then obviously you need a small Torx bit inside the actual clips to remove them from the actual lines, and then you can remove this brace. Also note that the clutch line runs round and over the top of it and up and sits in that clip there. Once you've removed this 15 nut bolt, you need to then remove this clamp and the clamp there for the power steering lines, and then that can then basically come out of the car, that clamp. Taking the slave cylinder pipes off is pretty easy. You just use a small flathead screwdriver, and that little grey pin where the pipe connects to the actual slave, you simply pry that up and you can pull the pipes off. Remember to have some sort of tub or pot handy to catch all the excess fluid that will drip out from the pipes. To get to all the gear linkage assembly, it's purely behind this plastic. You pull these clips off and all the gear linkage stuff will be behind it. Here's the gear linkage assembly. Also, you've got the drain plug for the gearbox and the fill plug. You will need that later if you want to top up the gearbox fluid. Then the reverse light switch is just there. To get these out, it's pretty simple. See these orange tabs here? You literally twist them towards the passenger side of the car, and that should pull out. And at the bottom, you press in this tab here. This one pulls off. And on the other side, same story up top with the clip, but on this one I found getting a small screwdriver and prying this bit of plastic out was the easiest way to take this one off. You also need to remove the rear engine mount. I've got a video on how to do this, but it's simply just this bolt, that bolt, that bolt and that bolt, and that thing just drops out, and that's that part done. Just up here you'll find that hole there. That is where one of the transmission bolts is. So you can undo this starter motor bolt, but the other two are on the other side and they're easy to get to when the gearbox is dropped. But this one, if you just sort of, when the starter motor is in place, you should be able to get to that one. If not, remove the starter motor and you can move it like that, and you can easily get to that bolt. You'll find there's also a 13mm on the front of the gearbox holding on a boost pipe. There is another 13mm holding the gearbox on. You can get to this with a small ratchet spanner. There are also two small 13mm bolts on the bottom side of the gearbox, as you can see here. You don't need to remove the exhaust to get to these. I managed to get to these with a 13mm spanner, and you can wiggle them out of the way. So this next part about dropping the gearbox, this is a bit tricky, but basically what you want to do is find yourself a nice piece of strong wood on a jack, roll it under the engine side, make sure you don't put too much pressure on the sump of the engine, and basically you want to support the engine and gearbox weight. You then want to crack the nut on the gearbox mount on the other side, and you should feel the gearbox start to be able to rock, but it won't drop because you're supporting it with the jack. You then simply slowly lower the jack down, and you'll find that the engine and gearbox tilt to the gearbox side and it's resting on the engine mount. You then need to either keep that jack there or find a way of supporting the engine without supporting the gearbox. Now, as you can see, when you look up towards the block of the engine from the gearbox side, you can see there are two upper bolts holding the gearbox to the engine, and you can also see the two other holes where the starter motor bolts are located. The left-hand top bolt can be accessed with a small 13mm socket. The two other starter motor bolts can be accessed with small sockets, but the other right-hand engine mount on the top side is a weird design. I'll show you a picture on the screen. This is basically a bolt with a nut on it. Now, the reason you've got both of these is because that small 13mm nut on the front is holding an earthing strap for the battery to the block. So you need to remove that 13mm first, and you'll find there's a small bronze bracket, which you can see on screen, comes with it. then you can remove the 13mm bolt holding the gearbox to the engine. Before you undo the last gearbox bolt, you'll notice at the end the gearbox will start to pull away from the engine. It's a good idea to either get a friend, or I used a massive pillow I had, or another jack if you've got one, to support the gearbox as it comes off. You do not want to drop it, it is very heavy. Once the gearbox off, you can actually see now where all the bolts are. I'll leave this picture on screen as a reference, but you can see that there are some on the bottom, some around the side, and a lot on the top. Pressure plate and clutch looks like inside the gearbox for reference. The clutch pressure plate is held on with 6 small 10mm bolts, which you can take off one by one. If you haven't got an impact, you may need to hold the flywheel in place with a tool. So here's the inside of the gearbox. You can see it's disgustingly dirty. I've given it a massive clean and then fitted a new slave into the gearbox. This is simply 3 7mm nuts. Just before I refit my new clutch, I just wanted to show you the old stuff, and don't worry too much, this rust is coming back where it's just been sat out back in my yard in the rain. But basically this was the old clutch friction disc, and as you can see it's actually still got a fair amount of meat on it. And this is the pressure plate. Now, little story quickly, I could not find any trace of this clutch ever being replaced on this car, but 175,000 miles, it must have been done at least once, because otherwise that would be amazing, and for it to have that much meat still on it. But I did find this had been replaced, because on the back somewhere there, I think, yeah, it says Luck, which is the aftermarket brand for the Ford clutches for that particular car. The part that has failed in this case is actually the slave cylinder, which I had a feeling, because my clutch was dropping to the floor and not returning, or it was returning because it's got a spring but it had no pressure in it. And the reason for this is because this slave is literally the most solid, like it's so jerky. Can you see that? It's like there's no resistance in it whatsoever. This part, however, is still original Ford. I found a Ford badge on it. Where did I find the Ford badge on it? There, can you see that? Ford. This part was obviously not changed when they changed the clutch plate, because this has got tons of meat on it and it wasn't slipping, it wasn't smelling, but obviously this has failed. If they'd have changed this with this clutch would probably have still gone for, I don't know, another 30,000 miles, that looks like. So basically what I'm saying is buy the clutch kit that has all of this and just do it all at once. Preventative maintenance, regardless of the state of the clutch, just do the whole thing, because it would just make your life a hell of a lot easier, because you're taking the gearbox off and this is in the gearbox, so you might as well do it while you're in there. And that's basically the old clutch there, and it's destroyed. This is the new pressure plate and clutch going on. Now the key with the bolts on this is to remember to tighten them down in sort of a star shape, because you're tightening the clamping force of the actual pressure plate to the flywheel. So you need to tighten them down, you know, in a star shape, so the clutch pressure plate and that gets a nice uniform clamp onto the flywheel. You'll notice the more you tighten it down, you'll have to rock the pressure plate in the direction that it wants to sit. So if you tighten the bottom left one, you probably will then have to tighten the top right one, then probably the one next to it, and so on and so forth. Just take your time with this step. And then also, guys, just before I restart the rebuild procedure of the engine and gearbox, check your gearbox mount while it's out of the car, because that was mine. As you can see, it's destroyed. Now, what makes me laugh, and it does actually make me die about this country, is the fact that this would be an MOT failure, but because you can't see it when all the stuff's in the way, it can't be checked. So they just have to assume it's still working. This is probably why my engine was so vibrating, and when I let off the throttle, the whole car just juddered, because the gearbox was basically bouncing up and down like that, and then side to side. So I'd recommend highly getting a new one of these, because it's really simple. It's literally these two bolts. Just make sure you draw, you know, a mark where it came out of, and you can put it back in the same space. If the gearbox is out of the engine and you can get to this part, do it while it's out of the car, because this literally cost me £20 on eBay. Then basically, guys, refitting is just a reversal of what you've just done. It's extremely difficult to get the gearbox back on the driveway, but it is possible with 2 people. Other things to bear in mind is that everything just needs to go back basically where you found it. It is time consuming, it's difficult. It took me a week and a half to do this, but I've no doubt you can do this, because if you just document where everything comes from, and hopefully this video gives you a reference of where everything can be on the engine and gearbox, you should be able to do it, no doubt. Okay guys, there she is. The Fiesta is completely back together after the first time doing a clutch change properly on a car. I'm blown away by how much I know these days, like, considering I've come from nothing. Like, I am not formally trained in the slightest. I think that was a big undertaking, and to do it on the driveway. So if I can do it, you guys can definitely do it, and I hope this video really helped in guiding you on how to do it, because it's a bit of a fiddly job. It took me a week and a half start to finish, but that was only working maybe a couple of hours a day on it. But basically, guys, does it start and run now? Well, unfortunately, I'm going to have to make you wait until the next video. But until then, guys, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to hit this the like button if you've enjoyed this video. And I will see you in my next video to find out if I actually change the clutch and that car starts and drives. See you then.